because it's literally
I
right next to my
can.
office, but it's okay.
That's cool.
Yes.
Okay.
We're
Well,
good. It's stop.
okay.
Six
I'm going to
o'clock.
read a little bit of bio about you,
Okay.
but I do want you to share with us a fun fact or something about you that we may not know, or something about you that we might be interested to know but would never know. Okay. So Karen, New York Times bestselling author, was born in Oklahoma and lived in many places during her childhood, including Venezuela and London. She graduated from the American School in London and came back to the United States to attend college at Tulane University in New Orleans and quickly fell in love with the Big Easy. Since 2009, Karen has written and released over 27 titles. Her book, The Girl on Lagari Street, earned a New York Times best-selling title, as did her novel On Folly Beach, which released in 2010. She has also co-written 3 other novels with authors Beatrice Williams and Lauren Willing. The newest of these books, co-written with these authors, is titled All the Ways We Said Goodbye and released in 2020. These 3 authors are fondly known as Team W, and they will release a brand new book on May 17th titled The Lost Summers of Newport. Karen's latest book, The Shop on Royal Street, has been out for a few weeks now and is a spinoff to her beloved Trad Street series. Although you don't need to have read any of the books from Trad Street, because The Shop on Royal Street is going to become its own series and is set in New Orleans. So, Karen, tell us something that we may not know that we might find very, very interesting.
I don't like to write. I never have. Never wanted to be a writer.
Really?
Never planned.
That is
I don't.
probably the most unusual thing that I would
Yeah.
not have expected that at all.
Yeah. I mean, literally, I have to glue myself down to my desk chair.
Goodness.
Yeah, it's just not my favorite thing to do. I would much rather be typing the end, going on tour,
Okay.
thinking up a story, everything except the actual writing of it.
Okay. Okay. So I kind of get that. You like everything about creating the story and the characters, just the actual having to sit and write the book is just very difficult.
Right. And not even, it's always been difficult, but in the beginning of my career, it's never been easy, but it was certainly, I could actually sit down for hours of interrupted time to write, and that, I would just do it. Now, even with my kids, when they were at home, it was easier for me to schedule that 7-hour block of writing time, because the kids would go to school, my husband would go to the office, and I knew I had that guaranteed time. There was no social media. There was no, excessive promotion. It used to be that, I mean, I'm with Penguin Random House, and they do a heck of a lot of promotion, but not as much as they used to do. I'm expected to do a lot of it. And then I'm, taking care of my parents. My daughter's getting married. There are so many other pulls for my time that it drives me crazy, because even when I'm sitting down, if I have 2 hours to write, I'm still mentally not there. And that makes writing a million times harder.
I get it.
I understand. I understand, because
Yeah.
to write, you really have to focus. You have to go down that rabbit hole. You have to
Right.
be there for many hours, focusing only on those characters and
Right.
those words.
And that's a fun thing. That is the
Mhm.
thing I love to do. But
It's creating.
unfortunately, right. And, because, that like the first half hour of sitting down to write is the hardest. And I guess it's like surgery anesthesia. You know, you get used to it after a while, and then you pick up the flow and it's good. But the thing when you're just writing in short spurts of time, that just as you start getting involved in it, you have to be dragged away to do something else. So you're constantly undergoing that knife again and again throughout the day instead of one just deep cut and just deal with it, you know?
Right.
Sorry to be so, I don't know why I'm so. Oh, I know. I know. I was just watching a investigation ID True Murder. That's why. Yeah. Sorry.
I love those.
I know.
I
That's
love
how when I
those
eat my
shows.
lunch, that's what I watch on TV because, you know, why
And
not?
I
can
love
we
that.
talk about how beautiful this book cover is?
I
Because
love that
this
cover.
is so pretty. And I am almost finished with it. I just have this much left to read. And there is so much to unpack in this story. So many mysteries, so many curiosities that are in this story that you've created. Wonderful. And because I grew up in Mandeville and we met at, I graduated from Mandeville High School in 1985. And we met at the shop, the Garden District shop on Royal, in the Garden District
Mm-hmm.
during the tour for your very first signing for the shop on Royal Street. And I thought maybe you might be on tour now, but you're not. Are you?
Well, you know, it's been kind of sporadic. So I had 3 weeks of solid tour, and then I got home Good Friday, then left again Tuesday because I had an event in Fripp Island. It's a long drive, so I spent the night, and then I came back. And then my daughter came home to do wedding stuff and a bridal shower, and she just left an hour ago. And then next week I'm gone 2 days to 2 more events, and and this is the part where I'm gonna have to do the thing I never thought I'd do, and that's, you know, June 1st. Like, I love my readers. That is the best thing about being on tour is, you know, meeting people and
Yes.
talking about books and characters and all the things that you know we have in common. But you know what, I'm not going to have anything to go on tour with next year if I don't actually write the book. And I'm excited about this book. I want to lose myself in it. And so June 1st, I have to take a hiatus, you know, from all social media, from everything and every event. I've already committed to a couple of speaking events actually in New Orleans in June. But that's it. I mean, I just want to write and do wedding planning. That is it. And finish unpacking my house because we moved November 2nd, right before when I went on book tour for the last book, and there's still so many things that are undone. So
That's what I'm doing right now.
She is
yeah.
in the process of unpacking now.
Oh,
We just moved this weekend.
it's a nightmare, and I'm
I
like,
have boxes everywhere.
I just do a box at a time, and
Yes.
Yeah.
we're having to hold back on some things because we're replacing 99 windows, and they keep on saying, you know, it was supposed to be March, and then now they're saying May, and just in time for my next book tour where Beatrice and Lauren will be staying with me for a couple of nights. I'm like, we'll be tired. We'll be able to sleep through having the windows pulled from the walls of our bedrooms and replaced, right? No problem. It's fine.
No problem.
Are you still in Georgia?
We are. We just moved three miles down from our old house. So long story.
Very
Right.
cool.
Because I'm insane, and I see one of my dear friends from New Orleans, Linda Ryan, is watching. And hi, Linda.
Yeah.
And yeah, she you know, we love chaos. She's dealing with chaos now because of was it Hurricane Ida, I guess, last fall that put holes in her roof, and the insurance company is not doing what they're meant to be doing. So she's living with tarps and you
Oh
know, waiting to
gosh.
replace things, but you can't replace things when the roof isn't, you know, intact, and you know.
Right.
So
Oh
I'm
my
not
God.
gonna complain. I'm not
Well,
going to complain.
in the shop on Royal Street, you mentioned my favorite hotel, Hotel Monteleone.
Yes.
Love. But you also mentioned one that I'm not as familiar with, which is the Peter and Paul.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So I'm not familiar with that one.
It is absolutely stunning, and I discovered it in person while researching the book. Because it used to be, you remember in New Orleans, every neighborhood had its own parish, you know, and that's where the people would go.
Mhm.
You know, the nuns would be there, and then the priests would be there, and the school would be there, and the church would be there. It was like a whole community thing. And, you know, then as time goes by, a lot of them, this beautiful cathedral church was basically, because it used to be sort of in a working class neighborhood, was falling into ruin. And this one woman, and it's in the Marigny, so it's in the neighborhood that the book is set in.
Mhm.
And because my main character Nola is restoring a Creole cottage, you know, so I've subscribed to Preservation Resource, which is a magazine that's put out by the New Orleans Preservation. I can't think of it. New Orleans Preservation Society, one of the big preservation groups in New Orleans.
Mhm.
It's fabulous. They have great, you know, interviews, and perfect if you're researching about restoring old houses in the New Orleans area. And they had this story about this woman who everybody called her crazy, you know, because who would do that? Who would just say, and at the time the Marigny wasn't, you know, it was still kind of like crumbling colleges that hadn't started its revival yet. And,
Right.
you know, and it was going to take so much, not just money, but heart, soul, and, you know, just the
Right.
work, you know, to not only restore this building, all of the buildings, but to turn it into this gorgeous, like 4-star hotel. And it is stunning. The food is stunning. You know, it's just a beautiful place. And yeah, so I had to put that. And I think in the book I'm working on now, I think when people come visit Nola from Charleston, that is where they will stay. So I guess when I go back to New Orleans, I'll need to stay there to make sure I get the research right. But
Exactly. I was wondering what you do for research.
I know,
Like,
'cause I believe in suffering for my craft. I will have to go to that hotel and stay there and eat the
exactly.
food in New Orleans.
Yeah.
I mean, somebody has
It's
to.
a hardship, right?
It's a hardship. And to my readers, you are welcome. And
Yes.
good for you.
Do you
Yeah.
want to tell us about your speaking engagements in June in New Orleans?
It is
Are
New
there?
Orleans, but it's for the if I can get the associates, their annual luncheon for women's clubs of America, I believe, or something similar. So I'm not looking at it right now, and if I'm butchering the name, I apologize. But like 800 ladies, and they're coming to hear me, so I have to think of something interesting to say, which won't be "I hate writing," because, and that's not really true. I mean, I'll think of something clever. I don't know. Maybe I'll do a song and dance. I don't know. I'll mime everything. That'll be really interesting. Well, I'll hire a mime to mime what I'm saying. And
Oh my gosh, that's funny. No, I wanted to know, like, I know the Trad Street series is done in Charleston, South Carolina. Is there a reason that you picked that location?
well, New Orleans was my first location, but when I first started planning that series, that was 2005. And of course, in August, you know, a little storm called Katrina visited New Orleans, and that sort of changed my plans. And I picked New Orleans because I knew immediately my main character would be a realtor who could talk to the dead. So I wanted a very Southern Gothic, very, you know, full of architecture, history, and ghosts. And of course, I thought of New Orleans, and then I couldn't do it. So then that's why I chose Charleston. And I've always had this really mental connection to Charleston. I never lived there. I never grew up there. Funny though, when my daughter was doing research for DNA, you know, genealogy, she found that we had lots of family in the Low Country and in Charleston. So that was very
Oh,
interesting.
that's neat.
Yeah, yeah, but
That's
I just
very
love the Low
interesting.
Country. I'm definitely going back there for one of my single
Oh, I
trips.
would love to go out there. I've never been to Charleston yet.
Really? No, you definitely
Yeah,
need to. And yeah, and it has so many similarities to Charleston, to New Orleans. You know,
New
certainly
Orleans,
it
yeah.
doesn't look as horrible in Charleston in July as it does in New Orleans in July. So
Right. The
give up
humidity,
on
you gotta love it.
it. And flying cockroaches, except in Charleston, they're a little more genteel and they call them
Yeah,
palmetto bugs, whereas in New
palmetto bugs,
Orleans,
yes.
they call them flying cockroaches because that's what they are.
That's awesome. Now, I know Perry said that you lived in Venezuela
Hmm.
when you were younger. Was that before you went to high school and college, or?
Yeah, so both my parents are from southern Mississippi, but my dad worked for Exxon. That's why we lived in all the oil places like, you know,
Right.
Oklahoma and Houston. And we actually lived my dad was at the Exxon headquarters, which at the time were in New York. I think they're in Houston now, but in Manhattan. So we lived in northern New Jersey for a number of years. And then that's when we started going overseas. We went to Venezuela for a couple of years. We were in London for 7 years and The Hague for 3 years.
Oh,
That was
wow.
all before I went to college. So
Okay, that's awesome. Well, I know in Venezuela, they normally speak Portuguese, correct?
no, Spanish.
Oh, it is Spanish.
Hmm.
Okay.
Hmm.
Okay. So are you fluent in any of
I,
that
you know, I, I
when
was
you're there?
very, I mean, but that was when I was in elementary school. I was fluent.
Okay.
We had a live-in maid who did not speak English. And I had a little brother who's 8 years younger than I am. And he actually spoke more Spanish than English when we lived there because she was sort of his nanny too.
Right,
So,
right.
but it was funny, like he wouldn't speak Spanish to us, and he wouldn't speak English to her. Like he knew.
Yeah,
He knew there were two different languages. So that was really interesting.
that's really cool.
Yeah.
Now, do you have any, I know I ask this to every author, because I don't have any formal education in writing. Do you have any, did you go to college for that, for creative writing or journalism or anything like that?
No, because remember, I hated to write. That was not something.
Yes, that's why I was afraid to ask. I'm like, oh, maybe she
I
doesn't.
love stories. You know, I loved creating the stories and telling my
Right.
teachers, and my teachers were always saying you should be a writer, and I'd be like, ugh, no, I just no. Um, and I did realize later on, once I was such a fast typist, I realized that the reason why I hated writing, because when, back in the day when I was in school, everything had, all your assignments were handwritten. And I
Handwritten.
remember, like I'd be writing and, my story in my head was like going, a million miles a minute, and my handwriting was like this.
Right.
And, I would forget it by the time I got to it. And my handwriting would be so fast, and I would be getting so frustrated because I couldn't keep up with my story. And I would always get an A+ in content and then an S in handwriting. So I learned very early to be discouraged by writing, that it was, it was
Yeah.
just very frustrating for me. Because again, I was creating these great stories. I just couldn't get them on the paper fast enough.
Fast enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I learned how to type later on, but by then I'd already had this thing in my head, like, writing.
Right.
But it
So,
wasn't the creative part that I hated, it was the
right.
actual writing part. So I was actually a business major in college, and
Oh, okay.
yeah. And,
That's cool.
but the good thing is I went to a college prep high school. The American School
Hmm.
of London is very, it was actually more difficult than Tulane. It was extremely hard. I had to
Yeah.
write a 50-page term paper, in AP American history. And
Wow.
um, so, you know, um, so we had to take writing classes. That was, you
Right.
had to know how to write. And I enjoyed, I had to take creative writing. I had to take, of course, all the sort of professional writing classes and stuff like that.
Hmm.
I knew how to do it. And the creative writing classes, again, very frustrating, but we would have enough time to get the assignments done so that
Right.
I could take a slower approach to it, which helped a little bit. But I was a business major. I did not. And then at Tulane, even though I was a business major, you had to apply for the business school your sophomore year, because the business school was only junior and
Yes.
sophomore year. So I
Right.
had to take all those prerequisites. And, Tulane was very good about making sure their students were very well-rounded. You had to take a science, you had to take,
Yep.
the writing classes, you had to take all these other things.
Yep.
And so that was really good. So I took creative writing again, and journalism class, I think, and of course, all the English classes and literature classes.
Right.
So even though that wasn't my major, I was still exposed to a lot of really great instruction in both high school and college. And the biggest teacher to me was, I've always been a voracious reader. I just
Hmm.
adore reading. And that was really my biggest teachers were
I
the
was going to ask you,
book.
like, what was it? What was it that made you write that first book?
It was a book hangover. I had read Dinah Gabaldon's Outlander series, and
Um,
I couldn't pick up another book. I have stacks of books around me, but I couldn't pick up another book to read because I was still living in that world. And
hmm.
um, And I just remember, you know, my teacher saying, Karen, you should be a writer, and me going, "Ugh." But I couldn't, and I missed books because I couldn't pick up another book to read. And I was like, oh, you know, didn't tell anyone what I was doing. I was just like, you know, I'll just write the kind of book I'd want to read. And I
Right.
ended up writing my first book, competed
That's
for a
amazing.
contest, and that's, you know,
Yeah.
and the only reason why I entered the contest was because Diana Gabaldon was going to be the finalist judge, and that's and then I ended up winning the contest. And not only did I get a lovely a critique from her, but I also got offer of representation by a New York literary agent, and she was my first agent. So
Okay.
That's
And
awesome.
that book that you're speaking of is called In the Eye of the Moon,
no,
or
In the Shadow of the Moon.
Shadow of the Moon. Okay.
Mhm. And then
And it's kind of a story that time travel, where
it
the
is time travel.
character slips back into the Civil War era and
Right.
meets this handsome Civil War soldier.
hmm
I haven't read that one, but I did look at it,
It's a
and
real
it
reader
sounds
favorite.
like, it sounds
What's so
very,
cool though is that my
yeah.
current publisher, Penguin, because the rights had reverted back to me, and so I sold them to Penguin, and I was able to really revise because that was my first book, you know. So I was able
Right.
to revise, and I was so proud of how much I still loved that book. Like, this is not bad, you know, for a first book. It came out in
Yeah.
2000.
Yeah.
And so actually I was able to do that. They bought the rights for my first two books, In the Shadow of the Moon and Whispers of Goodbye, and they put them in a double volume called Spinning the Moon, which is in print. So it's actually 31 books in print right now, and they're all in print. I've written 31 books and they're all in print, which is pretty cool. So yeah, including In the Shadow of the Moon and Whispers of Goodbye. So
That's
if
awesome.
anybody wants to be a Karen White purist, you can still go to the beginning and read the book. So
That's cool. I love that. I'm gonna have to look for that.
Well,
yeah.
I have enjoyed reading Trad Street, and I've read through the first five. And I was wondering about, because you talk about antiques with a lot of knowledge and description, and I was just wondering, and old houses. So I was wondering if you just had always had like a love of antiques and a love of old houses and that kind of history behind them.
I've always loved old houses. My father is a huge history buff, and as children, he would take us to historic homes to tour. He would take us to battlefields. He would take us to museums. Um, you know, my brothers just constantly fought. Like I remember at Gettysburg, they were pretending, you know, one was from the South and one was from the North, which just gave them the excuse to, you know, beat on each other, where I was like, you know, seriously interested. But I've always had a thing for old houses, and it didn't have to be grand or spectacular, but like today, they just don't know how to make beautiful things anymore. Like nobody takes pride in craftsmanship, or it's very rare that you find a new house where they've actually taken, like, it shows some knowledge of architecture, um,
Right.
and timelessness. And I've always loved that. My mom tells me as a little girl, you know, we'd be going to the dentist or something when we lived in northern New Jersey, and I would tell her to just stop. I wanted to look at a house, you know, because it had like a turret, or I liked like the windows, like the leaded glass windows or something. And then we moved to London, and we lived in a beautiful building on Regent's Park that had been built in 1904, which was the Edwardian era. And you know, and that was like holding history in your hands, especially when, you know, the porter told us when we moved in, that's what the reason why some of the windows were plain glass and some were leaded glass was because during the Blitz, nearby bombs had shattered some of the windows. And because it was wartime, they were just replaced with plain glass, and that's how they had remained. And, you know, just to think that people lived in that flat and in that bedroom when bombs were falling, like, you know, the Blitz was 9 months of almost nightly air raids by the Germans. And to think that they survived it